Today's daf is daf samach beis. Yachal loyu nazirim talmud lomar ish. Why don't we assume that the word ish is a ribui, just like we found that ish in the parasha of Erchin is a ribui to include goyim in nerachim. So too the word ish in the parasha of Nazirus should come to be marbe, the Nazirus of a goy. And even though Bnei Yisrael is coming to exclude akum from Nazirus, that's only as far as the din of being galeach al Nazirus aviyah. But they themselves could become Nazirim. They can't fill in for the giluch of their father, but personally they could become Nazirim. And the Gemara rejects this limud because we have Allah Moshe Sinai that a person could be megaleach al Nazirus aviv, and it's impossible to assume that Bnei Yisrael is coming to exclude Ovei Kochav for that halacha because it's not in the pasuk at all. It's not mefurish in the Torah. It's only halacha Moshe Sinai. And since we cannot interpret the miut of Bnei Yisrael as opposed to Akum with regard to any particular dimension of Nazirus, whether it is Karban and Nazir or whether it's the halacha of Ein Adam Madir, that an Akum cannot be Madir his son, or that his son cannot bring to the Giluach as a replacement for his father, we have a general miut of Bnei Yisrael, and it's not coming to exclude Akum from any particular dimension of Nazirus. Then we have a ribui of Ish, and that should teach us that Akum should be included in Nazirus, and an Akum Yochel Lios Nazir. So therefore, we have no choice but to assume that the miut of Bnei Yisrael is coming to be made Akum Legamri. Again, we don't know what to do with the word Ish. The ribui of Ish is going to have to come up to be marbas something. The Rosh points out that we cannot dash in the word Ish as a ribui, and maybe that means that we don't dash in Ish at all. But others say that there's another drasha that's derived from Ish. We don't know what it is. The final conclusion of this Gemara is to support the answer of Rava. There's no equation between Erchin and Nazirus, and even though in Erchin a guy, although he's excluded Mibnei Yisrael, he is included because of the ribui of Ish. However, in the case of Nazirus, we have no possibility of being marbe and mimayit in that way, and therefore the miut of Ovei Kochavim with regard to Bnei Yisrael below Akum is complete, and a Nazir and a guy is completely excluded from the Nazirus. The Gemara says, Ish ki yafli neder be'erkecha be'arochin lamali. The Gemara asks the following question. We have an equation between Arachim and Nidarim. And in both cases, the Torah speaks about Haflah. So in the case of Erkecha, it says, Ish ki yafli neder. So that's in the parsha of Erchin, and we have it in the parsha of Nidarim as well. Michti to Iskash. We have a Hekesh Arachim l'Nidarim, and the Torah says in Erchin, the same kiyafli that appears in the parsha of Nidarim appears in the parsha of Arachim, and we therefore derive a hekesh between Arachim and Nidarim. Vasanya, and the Brisa says, L'gabi Nidarim, it says, Ish mi beis Yisrael u'min hager b'Yisrael asher yakra. And that's the pasuk Ish, a double Ish in the parsha of Nidarim. Why did the Torah have to double the word Ish? That a guy is included in the parsha of Nidarim and Nidavos. And now we have a hekesh between the parsha of Nidarim and Nidavos and the parsha of Arachim. So we can now derive the conclusion that just like a guy is included in Nidarim and Nidavos, they should be included in the parsha of Arachim. And therefore, it doesn't make sense to exclude them completely from the parsha of Arachim, but rather through this hekesh to Nedarim, we're going to include them in the Parsha of Arachim, and then we don't need the ribui of Ish in the Parsha of Arachim. Even without that ribui, we would know that Bnei Yisrael is not excluding, the Pasuk Bnei Yisrael is not excluding an Akum completely from Arachim, but rather just that Ein Marichin, but they're not included in Ein Nerachim. So therefore, Ish ki yafli b'arachim lomali. So the pasuk of Ish is completely superfluous in the parsha of Harachim, because even without the word Ish, we would know the Nakum is Nerachim v'Eino Marichim. Where it says Elahai Ish, the Ish in the parsha of Harachim, Ish ki yafli miboile li'isuye mufla samach li'ish. Now, this depends on a great machlokes about a boy who's before gadlus, but he knows lemi shehu noder, and he's called a mufla samach leish. So he understands the concept of a neder, and therefore he's called mufla. In other words, hafla means something that's explicit, and since he's 1 year close to being ish, let's say, in the case of a young boy, he's 12, or in the case of a girl, she's 11. And according to one Mandiyamar, the halach of mufla samach leish is doraisa. His neder is valid on a doraisa level, as long as he understands what a neder is all about. And that's why we have to be bodek a child who took a neder, that maybe he's a samach leish. And therefore, in Erechin, we have a special ribui of the word ish to include a mufla samach leish in Arachin. So the Gemara says, "Anichal amandi amar mufla samach leish dorai." So according to that shita, I understand that a katan who's samach lios ish could take a neder, and I need a pasuk to teach me that. But at the end of the day, I derive a din doraisa of mufla samach leish. And therefore, we could justify the word ish, which is necessary to include mufla samach leish, alamandi amid rabbanon. But if I hold a mufla samach leish as an enterprise that was created and formulated by the rabbanon, and in Torah, there's no such thing as a katan, even if he's samach leish and he knows what they're about, to validate his neder. So then we're back to the question of ish ki yafli lamali. Why do we need the word ish? What's it coming to include? It can't be coming to include mufla samach leish, because that's only the rabbanon. So the Gemara answers that ish ki yafli. Why do I need it? Lasuye mufla samach leish di oved kochavim. That an oved kochavim who is 12 years old and he's not really an ish, that even though he's not an ish yet, if herich, ercho erech. And at this point, the Gemara is going to introduce the machlokas between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda and Erechin in Arachim Daf Heyamid Beis, if a guy is marichin or not marichin. Rabbi Meir holds, as we'll see in the Gemara later on, and we saw it also in the Gemara earlier, that an oved kacham is nerach v'lo marich. And that's because the miyud of Bnei Yisrael tells me that dafka Bnei Yisrael are marichin, but not akum. And the Rebbe of Ish tells me that even though they're not marichin, but they are nerachim. But Rabbi Yehuda disagrees, and he says just the opposite, that an oved kochavim could be marich, and his arach is an arach, it's erech, it's valid. But if somebody would be marich in him, that's worthless, because oved kochavim einam nerachim, and that he has from a ribui and a miut, as we'll soon see. So the Gemara now asks the following kash: you want to tell me that ish is coming to be marba in the case of a goy, a mufla samach leish, hanich lamandi yomar bnei Yisrael nerachim, v'eina oved kochavim nerachim. This works out very beautifully according to Rabbi Yehuda, that the goy is included in arachim, and the miut of bnei Yisrael is only on ne'erachim. Yachal, I might think, lo yu marichin, tamelo marish. So I need the pasuk ish, according to Rabbi Yehuda, to teach me that although a guy was excluded from their rachim by ish, nevertheless marichin, a guy is a marich. And if a guy would say erech ploni Yisrael alai, ercho erech v'chayv lahavi, is shaper. Now we understand very well why we need the ribuy of ish to teach me that not only can a guy who's mature and he's a gadol, can he be marich, but even a guy who's mufla and he's samach lish and he's not yet an ish, he too could take upon himself an erech, meaning maruch. So that's all according to the Shita of Yehuda, that the ribu is coming for marichim, and we need ish to teach me mufla samach lish and goy. According to his Shita, guy is not marich. And therefore, Bnei Yisrael is coming to teach me Bnei Yisrael marichim ve'nov they call marichim. And Yachol, according to Rabbi Meir, might think that the miyut of Akum is complete, and he's not in the parsha of Arachim at all. Lo yunerachim, and even as far as nerach, a guy is not a nerach. If Yisrael takes an erech on the value of a guy, Tamalomer ish. So the ribuy of ish is coming to tell me that even though, despite that Akum is not marich, but nevertheless nerachim. And if Yisrael said erech ploni ovi kokom alai, erech o erech, and he has to bring it. And according to this, the pasuk is being marba, that they are nerachim and not marichim. So I don't need an extra ribuy for mufla samach lish, unless you want to say that we need a ribuy that mufla samach lish is a nerach. And the answer is that's ridiculous, because hafilu tinok ben chodesh bar eruchehu. The pasuk says that michodesh v'mala, from 1 month after his first month's birthday, he's already considered an erech. He has an erech. And once we derive the conclusion that an akum is nerachim, then I don't need a ribui for mufla samach lish. Even a cotton, a tinok ben yomo or ben chodesh is already a nerach. So therefore, kiyafli lomali, we still have an extra pasuk and we don't know what to do with it. If the Torah would have just said ish to teach me that a guy is nerach, I would know ipso facto that he's samach lish is also a nerach, like a ben chodesh. Omarav ado bar avol. What do I need the word ish in arachim is lasuye ovikochom gadol. What does that mean, ovikochom gadol? We already have a ribui for nerachim according to Rabbi Meir. So the Gemara says in the name of Avad Barava, the Afal Gav the Gadol who he's not a mufla samach lish, and even though he's Eina Yodei lahaflos, he's already a Gadol, but he doesn't know anything about nedarim. He doesn't know to whom he took the neder, and therefore he is excluded from arachim and nedarim. And then, even though in the case of Yisrael, if he's a gadol, even though he doesn't know to whom he's taking the neder, nevertheless the pasuk, nevertheless his neder is valid. But in the case of a guy, this mute of ish is telling me that if the gadol, if the guy, even if he's a gadol, he doesn't know what the hafla is all about, and nevertheless. And therefore, even though in the case of Yisrael, his hafla would be valid, but nevertheless in the case of a guy, his hafla is not valid. So Gemara asks the kasha, Ela ki yafli, the kosar Rahman al-Gabi Nazir Islamali. So why do I need, and what do I derive from the parsha of Nazir? It says, Ish ki yafli. After all, Michdi ha-iskash Nazir Slinidarim, we have already a hekesh between nidarim and arachim, and they are equated for many, many different dinim. And in arachim it says ki yafli, and in nazirus it says ki yafli. So therefore, in nidarim it says and in arachim, but ki yafli and nazirus lomali. Whatever we want to derive from ki yafli, we've already derived. So why did the Torah have to add ki yafli in nazirus? We could derive it from Kiyafli in Arachim. And Gemara answers, Lasuya Yadayim Sheina Mochichos. This is a sheet of Abai, that Abai holds that if a person accepts upon himself a neder or a nazirus and a lashon yad, an incomplete language, and therefore we need some external circumstantial evidence to be mashlim his neder, that it's still valid. And even though the lashon itself is not mochicha, it doesn't have a proof that he means a neder. Like, for example, a person says aha. What does aha mean? It could be aha b'tainis, aha b'nazirus, but it is a nazir over lefanav, and therefore his yad is valid, and he becomes a nazir. Diitmar yodayim shedim mochichas Abaye Omar havin yodayim, but Rav Omar lo havin yodayim. So Abaye nicha, we can understand according to Abaye justify the pasuk of ish ki yafli that's coming to teach me yodayim shedim mochichas, because according to Abaye his shita is yodayim shedim mochichas havin yodayim, and that's derived from the extra ish ki yafli. And Rava, but Rava holds that Yadayim Shedim Achichas love and Yadayim is neder is not a neder. Ma'ikal Amemer. What are we going to derive from Ish Ki Yafli in the Pasha Nazirus? It's a redundant pasuk. And the Gemara answers, what do we derive from Ki Yafli according to Rava? Ela Ki Yafli mi boile l'chei Rabbi Tarfon. We're going to derive from Ki Yafli now locha Rabbi Tarfon that we need a hafla gemura. It's got to be absolutely certain. And this was a sugya back on Lamed Beis. There were two people walking on the way, and then someone was coming towards them, and one of them says, Hareini Nazir shezeh ploni, and the other one says, Hareini Nazir she'ein zeh ploni. And although Beit Shammai holds Shneim Nazirim, and Beis Hillel says, only the one to whom there was a kiyama tanai is a Nazir, but Rabbi Tarfon's of the opinion that neither of them are Nazirim. Desanya, Rabbi Yehuda Mishum Rabbi Tarfon, ein echad me'am Nazir, so you cannot be makabel nazirus unless you use an explicit vadai, a certain language, not a suffix language, and that's derived from the pasuk ish ki yafli, where it says anichel Rabbi Tarfon el Rabbana Ma'ikol Meimar. So we have a combination now of Rava and Rabbi Tarfon. Rava holds Yadayim Shedim Mochichas love and Yadayim, so it's impossible that ish ki yafli is coming to include Yadayim Shedim Mochichas, and we're now holding like Rabban and Rabbi Tarfon. Rabban and Rabbi Tarfon say that you can be makabel naziris even without afla. Ella says the Gemara, the pasuk ish ki yafli in the parsha naziris miboile l'chasanya is to derive a conclusion about heter nidar, and this is a brisa that's brought down in Chagiga on Daf Yudom and Aleph. Heter nedarim porchim bi'avir ve'ein lehem amashi yismochu. In other words, the parsha of Hataras Nedarim, the halach of Hataras Nedarim, does not have any basis. It's not anchored in the Torah, and that's the shita of the Chachamim, that Heter nedarim is not ein lehem amashi yismochu. But Rabbi Eliezer disagrees. He says yesh lehem amashi yismochu. We have a pasuk shenever ish ki yafli. And ki yafli shtei pa'amim. In the Parsha of Nazirus, it says ki ish ki yafli. In the Parsha of Arochim, it says ish ki yafli. And echad, one of them is coming to teach li afla li isa. Fi echad lafla leheter. So one is teaching me that there's an isa. He doesn't say which is which, and one is teaching me a heter. So there's a hataras nedarim with a source for hataras nedarim in the mikra, in the pasuk. And that's a pasuk yafli in the parsha of Nazirus. So Rabbi Eliezer is arguing that that's why the Torah says ish ki yafli in Nazir, and it's not superfluous. And now we answer the question: ish ki yafli in Nazirus. Lamali, why do we need the pasuk ish ki yafli in the parsha Nazirus? And that's the end of this Mishnah. And now, in Mitzvah Hashem, we go on to the next Mishnah.